Hello, and welcome to This Week Explained, your essential download on the global stories making headlines. We're ready to unpack yet another complex week from around the globe. But before we dive in, just a quick reminder, everybody, if you want to get each new episode automatically, make sure you're following or subscribed wherever you're listening right now. It's the easiest way to stay updated. And hey, if you're enjoying the show and want to help others discover it, leaving a quick rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify really makes a difference, and we really appreciate it. We also want to give a massive shout out to our sponsor for this episode, Fresh Roasted Coffee. Seriously, they're the reason we can keep bringing you the show every week. If you're a coffee lover like us and appreciate seriously fresh, high-quality beans, you've got to check them out. They have a fantastic selection. Plus, they've got a special deal just for our listeners. You can get 20% off your first order by using the code THISWEEK. That's THISWEEK when you check out. Just make sure to use the link in our show notes to grab that offer. Trust us, it's some of the best coffee around. Finally, remember that This Week Explained is part of the awesome Leon Media Network. You can discover more great podcasts over at leonmedianetwork.com. All right, let's get into what you guys are here for, which are the stories that are shaping our world. This week, we're breaking down the latest on the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, India-Pakistan ceasefire, and contested elections in Europe. Let's dive right into the latest developments in the war in Ukraine. It feels like the kind of news that could actually change things, or at least change the conversation a little bit. And when you're talking about a conflict of this magnitude, any shift in rhetoric from a major player like the U.S. is worth a close look. President Trump, after a call with President Zelensky, posted on Truth Social, because of course he did. He can't do anything without posting on his social media platform. He posted on Truth Social and said that the U.S. would impose sanctions on Russia if it didn't accept an extended ceasefire. This was late on Thursday.
Yeah, that was like a few days ago, last week.
Yeah, last week. So, Carvin, what is your read on this? It feels like a bit of a pivot, especially considering some of the administration's earlier positions.
Yeah, it is a pivot. I'd say it's a notable pivot. Everybody talks about Putin puppets and Russia Gate and all this kind of stuff. And here we have Donald Trump is going out there and he's trying to be very firm with the Russian president. Now remember earlier this year, we did see this administration make certain concessions to Russia. They broadened diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Russia. They even, I don't even know, it felt like 20 years ago, they voted against the UN resolution condemning Moscow for the war in Ukraine. It seems so long ago. So this tougher line, linking new sanctions directly to Russia accepting a 30-day truce for negotiations, is more of an assertive stance, and it's more aligned with Ukraine's immediate goals.
Ukraine did welcome it almost immediately, didn't they?
Yeah.
I mean, Zelensky said they were ready to have a full ceasefire right now, but Russia has always seemed to want different things before agreeing to a pause.
Yeah, look, and back in March, they had those talks in Saudi Arabia. The Trump administration did propose a 30-day truce, and Ukraine was on board. They wanted an end to the conflict, but it was Russia, and Russia's position has consistently been to negotiate the terms of a settlement before any ceasefire happens. Now, Trump had threatened sanctions before if Russia walked away from talks, but this particular social media post, I think, is the clearest link yet between new U.S. sanctions and a specific 30-day truce. Look, Trump even said the U.S., quote, calls for, ideally, so it's got to put in a little caveat there, ideally, a 30-day unconditional ceasefire, end quote.
And this call with Zelensky, it wasn't just about the war, was it? They were marking the anniversary of the end of World War II in Europe, which was May 8th.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this also happened right at the same time as Russia was celebrating their own victories.
Yeah, guys, remember? We were on the same side once.
Yeah, that was, I mean, we can't even get into the history of what happened. Talk about how the UK tried to invade Russia as they're fighting Germany to take down the Stalin-led communists.
Right.
It's crazy historical kind of how I don't know, alliances meander through the ether in history. It's wild. Um, Now, Zelensky's office did put out a statement. They said Trump confirmed he wants to see the war ended and that Trump is ready to help. And it's all part of this complex signaling that's happening there. We even had Vice President J.D. Vance chime in. Usually that seems to be on a negative spin on things. But J.D. Vance suggested that if the U.S. pulls out of talks, the blame's going to fall directly on Russia for not negotiating in good faith.
So all around, it's strong. It's a stronger diplomatic push, which I'm sure made Zelensky breathe a sigh of relief,
A little bit.
especially after that earth minerals deal that,
Yep.
So, but while all of these high-level talks and threats are happening, you have been digging into what Russia is actually doing on the ground in the territories that it occupies. And frankly, some of the information we've looked at this week is deeply disturbing. It paints a picture far removed from ceasefire negotiations.
Yeah, it really does. And a lot of this comes from the Institute for the Study of War. They did an entire breakdown of what was happening. So while the world focuses on potential peace talks, Russia is actively working to solidify its control and fundamentally change the fabric of the occupied regions in Ukraine.
All right, well, let's start with the property situation. We're talking about people's homes and their land that's belonged to the same families for generations.
Yeah, and this is systematic, and it's happening on a massive scale. The Kremlin recently claimed that they have inventoried over 250,000 real estate objects in occupied Ukraine, which they call Russian land, and they entered them into the Russian state register. Now, they frame this as, quote, protecting property rights, end quote, and allowing Russia to put a valuation on the real estate.
But obviously, Ukrainian officials are calling it something else. Looting.
Yeah, that's quite the term for it.
Pillaging.
Pillaging. That's a old world term.
Them Vikings.
Yeah. Now, the Mariupol mayoral advisor put out a pretty blunt statement. Said Russia is planning to nationalize these inventoried properties, and this nationalization that they speak of essentially allows Russia to seize Ukrainian property, auction it off, most likely to Russian citizens, and facilitate the illegal relocation of Russians into these occupied areas. Those Russians can then vote. They can continue to annex more and more of Ukraine. And this is what, so you're looking at this, we go broader scale. This is what Putin wants to do on a broader scale within Ukraine.
Have the Russian population seep into
Yeah.
Ukraine bit by bit.
Yep. And then, as he always says, well, they've always been Russian and they think of themselves as Russian. Well, when you put Russian people into that land, that becomes true and becomes a factual statement. So, yeah, I do believe, opinion-wise, that what we are seeing is robbery. I mean, these lands are not internationally recognized, and they're being taken, and they're occupied by Russia.
Not internationally recognized as Russian territory.
Right.
Okay.
They are internationally recognized as Ukrainian territory, even now, even though Russia voted and did that.
Russia voted.
Yeah, did that fake voting at gunpoint. Yeah, so it's robbery. And I think what we're also seeing here and what we just talked about is this sort of demographic engineering all rolled into what's going on here.
And it doesn't stop there, right? Like the tactics involving children are there. Those are particularly chilling. I have seen how Russia might be using children's summer camps in Crimea as human shields.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a deeply concerning possibility. Now, it's always deeply concerning when children are involved.
Right.
Now, Russia continues to promote occupied Crimea as a tourist destination. It is one of Russia's biggest tourist destinations. They're planning hundreds of these summer camps that you talked about for both Russian and Ukrainian children, including orphans and children of Russian soldiers. All this while Crimea is a critical military hub for Russia. It's also a legitimate target for Ukrainian forces. So you're seeing these vacations and parties and children's summer camps amidst bombings and military fighting on the ground. This is certainly putting children directly in harm's way.
But I mean, if their parents know that It's a dangerous area. Why would they send their kids there?
So no, that's where we get back to a lot of the kids are orphans or they're children of soldiers who are fighting battle. The parents don't have much say in this.
Oh.
The children are sent just like we have
But what do you mean
parents
by
and-
using them as human shields? Do you mean like a buffer between?
Right. So putting them out there in the midst of a battle,
Yeah. Okay.
right alongside a naval base. So Ukraine goes to strike a naval base, shrapnel flies, there are children in the area just trying to have fun.
So is it kind of like they're hoping Ukraine will
Absolutely.
fire on that area, and then they can say, "Look what they've done! They're killing our children."
Twofold, right? One, it could protect the area
If they
from
decide to-
bombing.
if they decide to stay away from it.
Right. And the other thing is definitely an international crisis that could, move some support away from Ukraine, right? Just like we're seeing with Israel, which we'll get into obviously in a few minutes.
Well, it seems like cultural erasure on a massive scale, honestly, since they're trying to
Yeah.
just kind of absorb Ukraine into Russia. And amidst all of this, the property theft, the militarization of children, what about the basic necessities there? Are they even able to provide for the people that are living in the area? I mean, I remember reading something about a critical shortage of doctors.
Yeah, you're right. And they're struggling massively. And this is both sides. We're not talking just Ukraine here. Russia is struggling massively. The Russian Ministry of Health even published a draft bill that would essentially force medical school graduates to work for 3 years in the occupied territories of Ukraine. Or they would face huge fines. So what are students going to do? They're going to go not pay the fine,
Right.
be a doctor in those areas. Now, some Ukrainian sources believe that some will be compelled to go under threat of mobilization into the Russian army. So even the fines, if that doesn't work, they're going to say, okay, well, now you're a Russian army doctor. You have no choice now. Now, the Luhansk Oblast administration called this shortage catastrophic. And just to give you an idea, so that was Luhansk. Now in occupied Kherson, they've only filled about 40% of the needed doctor positions. That is just devastating.
Right.
To think of how many people need medical support in that region.
And only 40% of the doctors
Yeah.
position.
And so what they're doing is that they're trying things like overhauling medical colleges and building housing to attract the personnel to work there. But programs like one which is the Zimsky Doktor, that aims to relocate Russian doctors. It also serves the dual purpose of repopulating areas with those Russian citizens. And now you have higher class Russian citizens in these areas. And it's a recipe for just a terrible, terrible humanitarian crisis.
So, on one hand, we have this diplomatic dance around a potential ceasefire and sanctions, a glimmer of something that could ease the fighting. But on the other, there's this relentless campaign by Russia within the territories that it controls within Ukraine, seizing property, manipulating and militarizing children, and failing to provide basic services. It's definitely a grim reality check.
Yeah, it is. Now, I will say the high-level political maneuvering is just one layer of this, but what's happening on the ground in Ukraine demonstrates Russia's long-term strategic objectives. They're not just trying to hold territory, they're trying to fundamentally remake it in their own image. That's the context for any ceasefire talk, I think. It's not just about stopping the shooting. Peace is one thing, but when you just let a bully take over, that allows for more bullying. And I think what all this is, it's about what happens to the people there and the land that's caught in the middle of all this.
Well, as we wait for more from the ceasefire negotiations, it's time to shift our focus to the news that's coming out of the Middle East this past week. And I tell you, it has been intense, to put it mildly. We're looking at a situation where Israel has apparently set President Trump's visit to the region this week as a hard deadline for a hostage and ceasefire deal with Hamas.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that visit is slated for this week, May 13th to the 16th. So we're talking just a few days, right? The 16th is
Today's the 13th.
today's the 13th, and the 16th is 3 days after.
Yeah, guys, we are recording this later. But
Yeah.
we'll explain at the end of the podcast. We're not going to get
Right.
that right now. We're going to focus.
We'll focus on the news now.
We owe you guys some focus.
Yeah. An explanation, but focus first.
Yeah.
So what's happening here is that the Israeli Security Cabinet, according to multiple reports and even one Israeli defense official, has already approved plans for a massive offensive if no deal is reached. And they are calling that massive offensive Operation Gideon's Chariots.
Oh, fancy.
Yeah.
That's a fancy name. Gideon's Chariots. Even the name sounds ominous.
It's biblical.
So, okay. Well, so what exactly does this operation entail? From what I've read, it's not just another incursion.
No, look, this is orders of magnitude different than the other incursions, at least in its stated intent. Now, the plan reportedly involves the Israeli military moving to seize the entire Gaza Strip. I'm sure everyone's heard.
There we have it.
Right.
The real reason.
For years, the talk was that Israel wanted to do this just to take control of the entire Gaza Strip, and they're going to find a way to do that. And here's the plan to do it.
Gideon's Chariots.
What we're talking about here are either 4 or 5 armored and infantry divisions, and the objective, the Israelis say, is the complete defeat of Hamas, destroying its military, destroying its governmental capabilities, and of course, they want the release of all remaining hostages. It is believed there are about 59 hostages. Now, what I think last check, it was less than 30 who were still alive.
Right.
I think we're getting less and less now of those. I'm sure you saw the American that was released.
Yeah.
That was, and I don't know if we'll get into it today. That's probably another episode that we'll get into, but the Netanyahu-Trump friendship maybe no longer. Over the last few days, some actions by Trump have been severely anti, at least Benjamin Netanyahu.
Hey.
So
Trump can be surprising sometimes.
Yeah.
Seize the entire strip. Okay, is obviously their number one priority with Gideon's charity. I almost said charity.
Gideon's Chariot.
They're not being charitable.
No. And I was having a tough one with that too, trying to say that. It's not even a tongue twister.
No, it's not. But also, I'm a little rusty. It only takes 2 weeks for it to wear off. The articles, okay. Okay, hold on a second.
Yeah.
So what is going to happen after they seize the entire Gaza Strip? I mean, the articles mention Israel staying for a, quote, unspecified amount of time, end quote, potentially reoccupying it, indefinitely, since there's obviously no timeline, and they say, oh, it's for our safety.
Right, it's a buffer zone.
Yeah, forget about the Palestinians needing a place to live. We need to focus on our safety. But that's obviously a huge shift from the 2005 withdrawal from the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, it's a huge shift. It's a really complex picture that's framed here. So you've got the surrounding countries that surround Israel that are saying Israel's occupation is illegal. Not to mention the UN says it's illegal in most of the most international players. But then, as always, let's look at it from Israel's point of view. Many within Israel feel that, especially the conservative, the hardline right-wing part of Israeli government and civilians, say that pulling out in 2005 was frankly a fundamental mistake. So, what's the plan now? Well, the official word from the IDF is that they intend to remain in any conquered territory. And so what's the goal? To prevent any resurgence of terror. Or even using the term for it, the Rafah model, remember. But what was the social media thing?
All eyes on
Rafah. So that was something that the international community didn't like so much, what they did there.
Yeah.
And so what this means is essentially neutralizing threats and turning these cleared areas into security zones those permanent buffer zones under Israeli control. Let's be clear. This could mean flattening whatever structures are left after months of intense conflict.
So they're just openly calling it the Rafah model, knowing that Rafah is what kind of made people...
They're not calling it that.
Oh.
That's what people who have read the operation.
I thought you were saying Israel was calling it.
Yeah.
And I was like, why would they call it that whenever that's when people started kind of second guessing their stance on the conflict?
No,
not necessarily, obviously what happened in October. On October
7th.
Terrible. Horrible. Shouldn't have happened. But then, everything that happened after that.
Right. We go with the chicken or the egg, right?
Yeah.
Which, it's a paradox.
I just thought they were calling it that openly, like kind of mocking like the international community for, not agreeing with the way they were handling it.
Yeah,
that's what I thought. That's what I thought you were saying. And I was like, wow, the balls on Israel.
And I mean, look, all eyes on Rafah, and they talked about, and everybody was up in arms about it, but that was an Israeli victory. They were able to get hostages that were there, that Hamas said, well, nothing's in Rafah. Rafah's just a civilian zone, and they found tunnels, and they found all kinds of stuff.
But it was at the expense of thousands.
Oh, yes. At the expense of thousands of people, and then so it's who do you blame for that? And on this podcast, we like to blame both sides for what's happening.
Why is war
legal?
Why are we allowed to war?
Hashtag Bill Burr. Why is this legal?
Why is this legal? So the people.
Mm-hmm.
The people that are still there,
mm-hmm.
trying to piece together the lives that they, that's obviously been shattered by this entire conflict. We're talking about nearly 2 million Palestinians. What the heck happens to them under this plan?
Right, yeah. So I think it's a good time to unpack what could happen to them.
So this is just speculation, or this is what is Israel saying? This is what they plan on doing with the Palestinians?
This is according to the document seen on the operation.
Okay.
That would happen. And what we're looking at here is a plan that calls for the widespread displacement of all those people. 2 million, nearly 2 million Palestinians. So, nearly 2,000 people, not a small move, right?
2 million, you said 2,000.
Oh, yeah. 2,000 million. nearly 2 million. I wish I had the exact number, but I don't think anyone has the exact number of the amount of people. It could be over 2 million people, but that's still a lot. So looking at most likely a forcible relocation to a specific humanitarian zone, that would be in the southern part of Gaza.
Where they would withhold more
aid. Now, this goes back to, and we probably won't discuss it now because it's just happening right now. Go back to the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu.
Mm-hmm.
President Trump has removed sanctions from Syria, so that's a -1 for the Israelis. So U.S. is becoming more pro-Syria, which is a country that we talked about that's now led by a former terrorist who says he's resolved all those terrorist capabilities.
Right.
He's not a terrorist. He's a fun-loving guy now.
Right.
And then you have Donald Trump saying that he will require U.S. humanitarian aid into those parts of Gaza.
Nice.
For the people, because at least Netanyahu said they're not going to let the aid come through until Hamas is dismantled.
That is crazy.
Well, they say if aid comes through,
I know what his reasoning is, but the fact that he's like, I know what's going to happen. I know people are going to die. I know people are going to suffer. I know that, and I don't care because I'm just worried about my bottom line.
Right, and so yeah,
that's just. Having no compassion or empathy for those people whatsoever is just, it blows my mind.
But there is a rationality for Israel for this, and it's twofold.
I'm going to say that it's rational.
Well,
I mean, I know that they're worried about their safety, and I know they have suffered a lot too.
Well, I'm not saying that they're being rational, but they have a rationale. But they would say they have a rationale for it. And it's one, to separate the civilian population from the Hamas fighters. So that way they can... bomb and destroy everything and kill no more civilians.
But they haven't accomplished that yet. They haven't separated Hamas from the civilian population.
So you have to understand this plan.
Boy, do not talk about
I'm not trying to be. I really am not trying to be condescending or.
All right, I'm listening.
I just, you know me. I try to get my points out because then I'll forget it.
Yeah.
And then it's a
go for it.
Just jumbled mess of a point.
And now you're not getting to your point.
Yes, but so what was my point again? No.
They rationalize this.
Right.
They want to separate civilian population.
So this operation is...
We're talking about Gideon's chariots now.
Right.
Okay.
This operation is the last-ditch effort, right? So like you said, well, they didn't try to move all these people and start bombing from the very beginning. Well, that's because it was the very beginning. So Israel is seeing Hamas not agreeing to release all the hostages. And they're at a point where Netanyahu has to get back all the hostages, or the Israeli people are going to vote to kick him out. And so he needs to do this.
It might happen anyway.
Oh, yeah. It's going to happen anyway, and he's not going to live forever. No one's going to live forever. Yeah. So a lot of these conversations are moot points about leaders that are, authoritarian.
Trying to cement their legacies over everything else.
So this is just the last-ditch effort. I mean, what I'm saying there is removing 2 million people from an area is almost impossible. And the only reason to do it is when all other solutions failed. And so that's where Israel thinks they're at right now. All solutions have failed, and here they are. Now, that's the one thing. They're removing everybody to give the IDF more room to maneuver. The second thing that that is in their rationale is Israel contends that this is the only strategy that can prevent the tragic killing of civilians who are caught in the ceasefire or in the crossfire as human shields. And the reason they didn't do it before was what I talked to you about. There was just no way to do it early on in the war. So they're gonna try to do it now. But as you can imagine, and just like you heard in here, we tried a 20-second talk about this plan, and it's turned into a 30-minute talk about what's going on. A plan like this raises a ton of questions, and it gets a ton of opposition, even on this podcast.
But where do they plan on putting 2 million Palestinians?
Yeah.
I mean, I honestly don't care how Israel tries to spend this, like a single humanitarian area, wherever that may be, for 2 million people. Like, how do you know what the size of it is? Like what?
I don't. Would it? I mean, anytime you're talking about
2 million people.
Humanitarian camps, we're not talking about luxury
5-star resorts,
right? We're not talking about a 1-star.
Yeah.
We're not talking about a Best Western or...
Yeah, we're talking about a tarp and a can of beans, maybe.
Yeah. And so how big would it be? Enough to fit 2 million people?
Uncomfortably?
Yeah, on top of each other?
Right.
Probably.
Right.
I mean, go back to Hurricane Katrina, right? The Superdome.
Yeah.
Was that space big enough to fit all the people that they put in there? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But they had to do it. That's a different case. They had to do that.
Yeah.
There was no choice there. But when we're talking about these humanitarian areas, a lot of times, most times, it's not the best.
Well, okay, so there was also mention of Palestinians leaving Gaza voluntarily for other countries. I guess, resettling them in neighboring countries, and that obviously aligns with President Trump's vision for Gaza, which
Gaza.
Trump Plaza Gaza.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, no, I don't like how well that rolled off my tongue. Okay, so how realistic is that? Do you think these other countries will be willing to accept these refugees?
I think voluntary is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sense, Deanna. That's what I think.
Yeah, they want to go home. Like any person, they want to go home.
To their home. You remove anybody from their homeland. But that's war is hell, right? Or as they say in the show MASH for our older crowd. Hell is hell and war is war horrible and terrible. So
Is that what they said? Horrible and terrible?
no, but if I was writing the script, that's what I would have said. Hell is fine and war is horrible and terrible. That's so you asked how realistic it is to quote voluntarily and then force people, right? It's just hard for me to see how departures under that much duress could be considered voluntary. I don't think it is. And then critically, as of now, no country has even agreed to accept the displaced Palestinians. And that's despite, Israeli officials are going. Negotiations are ongoing right now with the other countries. They're not Egypt and Jordan. Those are the two countries that are going to be forced to bring these people in. They, at some point, most likely, they were going to be forced to take in the Palestinians.
Right.
They don't want to, for tons of reasons. I know people will say, well, that because Palestinians are one way or another and Egypt and Jordan don't want them. 2 million people. Do you know what that does to an economy when you're forced to take in 2 million refugees?
And you don't have all the resources necessary to support them.
You barely have the resources to support your own people.
Right.
And now you're forced to do this.
To find accommodation.
Look, if in the U.S., 2 million people, we've had this talk about the border, 2 million people crossing the border. That's devastating to everything, the medical system, all of that. If you're going to force that on these countries, you can see why they're not going to like Israel as a country that borders them.
Right.
They're going to force to do this. So Israel right here, I say, is doing themselves no favors in attempting to do this. Now, the international community, including some of Israel's own allies, have already condemned this voluntary immigration idea. And they also have rights groups warning this could be, once again, another war crime committed by Benjamin Netanyahu.
Is he not worried that by the end of this conflict...
I won't even let you finish that. Absolutely not.
You don't think he's worried?
No.
Yeah, okay. I was just... Okay.
Is Putin worried? No. I'm not saying they're on the same lines.
Yeah.
But no.
No.
They're not worried.
No. You don't think they'll ever have to face the consequences of their actions?
Absolutely not. Now, not on the international scene. Within his own country?
Yeah.
Could be. Very much could be.
Okay.
But I don't think he's worried about that worried for his own life or his own safety.
Right.
I think he's got enough money and enough family built up within the government that he feels he'd be safe.
Huh. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, to feel that safe and...
That entitled
to kill millions of people. Wow. And just be like, I'm not going to get in trouble for this. That's fine. I mean, they might wrap my hands.
Yeah.
Be like, oh, you bad boy, you shouldn't have done this. The international movie will do that.
Another movie, Inglourious Bastards. I've been chewed out, but I won't be killed.
Oh, Brad Pitt.
Yeah, when Brad Pitt's, he's like, oh, they're going to kill you. And he's like, nah, I'm going to get chewed out. I've been chewed out.
Okay, so... if this massive operation goes ahead, what is the plan for the humanitarian aid? I mean, they need it.
Yeah.
They need it now. The situation is already dire, and there are reports of food stocks running out due to the existing blockade since the last ceasefire broke down months ago.
Yeah, so I'll bring it back to what we talked about with Trump and Netanyahu. Now, the Israeli defense has said, and they've been quite clear, the current blockade on humanitarian aid is going to continue during this initial phase, and only after the start of that operation and then the broad evacuation of the population to the south would a new humanitarian plan be implemented. Now, this plan involves delineating an area in Rafah, secured by the IDF, where civilian companies, these private U.S. companies who want to make billions of dollars off of war, or should I take that part out?
No, I mean...
That's exactly what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
This is not a humanitarian thing by a lot of these companies. But, so these private U.S. contract companies would come in, get all the humanitarian aid, and they would hand out the aid. That way Israel can trust who's accepting the aid.
So they're vetting all the U.S. companies that are supplying the aid?
So if you are a defense contractor for the United States, you have to be vetted extremely. Now, I will talk crap about defense contractors and how much I don't like a lot of the big companies.
Right.
But they are vetted extremely carefully
Okay.
and intensely
Okay.
for everything that they do. Now, do they still make mistakes? Yes, absolutely. We're all human.
Human beings.
We're all gonna make mistakes, but that all gets vetted out. And the thinking here is that Israel can trust those U.S. companies, just as the U.S. trusts Israeli companies.
Mhm.
We have an Israeli drone company that's right down the house from us.
Right down the street?
Yeah.
You said right down the house.
Right down the house.
Right down the street from us, near
our favorite brewery. So, yeah, so that's what would happen there. And anyone entering that sterile zone would undergo these IDF security screenings.
Okay. Well, the UN and other international aid organizations have said that they won't take part in a plan like that, right? They cited violations of their core principles.
Yeah, exactly. The UN's humanitarian office basically accused Israel of wanting to use control over aid as a pressure tactic in all part of this military strategy.
That's kind of what it feels like.
Yeah, to most of the international community, it does feel that way.
Yeah.
And those in the international communities and other aid groups are deeply opposed to using armed personnel for aid distribution. Now, Hamas, for its part, called what Israel is doing an extension of a starvation policy.
Hamas, your people are starting to talk crap against you now, too. So don't try to act like you have zero. I'm trying to act like they got a moral high ground.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's still an extremely grim picture. So why is this deadline? Because remember, the whole reason why we started this whole thing is the deadline for the release of hostages and everything. It's tied to Trump's visit, which is supposed to be today and to the 16th.
Yep.
Is he playing an active role in trying to broker a deal?
No, that's a great question, and not really, because of what I've been talking about. These reports that indicate that his relationship with Netanyahu has been strained since he retook office. He's done that trip to Saudi Arabia and Qatar. He's gotten a plane out of it, and that is apparently more focused on bilateral issues and investments, not on Gaza. Now, some officials are saying nothing good is going to come of Trump visiting Israel right now. And so with that, I do believe I read either today or yesterday that Trump is going to bypass Israel and not meet with Benjamin Netanyahu.
Has Netanyahu said anything about that yet or no?
I didn't see what Netanyahu has said.
Because the optics of it would have looked better for Israel if Trump had come to Israel and posed for pictures and,
Yeah, and
then he could just float it like, oh, they fully support everything we do.
Absolutely. And on the flip side of that, the optics of Trump's visit to Israel would be called very bad, right?
Right.
Especially by Arab officials because of the escalating crisis that's going on.
Right. And what is the sticking point in the actual hostage negotiations? Like, why haven't they reached a deal to avert this yet? I feel like this has been the conversation for months and months now.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same fundamental disagreement that we've seen for months and months. Israel wants a partial, shorter-term deal. They want a 45 to 60-day ceasefire, and Hamas wants a comprehensive deal that ends the war entirely, releases all Palestinians being held by Israel, and removes Israel from Gaza completely. Now, Netanyahu has consistently rejected any proposal that ends the war outright, and he says that the only thing he wants to do is dismantle Hamas's capabilities first.
Okay.
Now, the White House focus, the Trump administration focus, according to some, has now, even more so, shifted towards Russia and Ukraine, as well as bilateral relations with Iran, less so bandwidth for the war in Gaza.
I mean, he still should have say something about it.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
you know how humans are.
You can't just turn around and ignore what's going on over there.
We only have bandwidth for so much.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, I don't know. Anyways, so this massive operation, Gideon's Chariots, is being presented as the alternative if Hamas does not agree to Israel's terms by May 16th. So how is this playing out inside of Israel? Surely there's opposition to such a drastic move.
Oh, absolutely. Many Israeli officials see this as a, quote, nuclear option, end quote. They'd much prefer a deal right now. Now, the decision here is highly controversial, even domestically, because you're going to mobilize 70,000 reservists, many of whom have served for over 300 days since October 7th. That's a huge ask. We've been through that before, right? You're off to war 365 days, you get another year off, and then you're doing, maybe 180 more, keep going. So those feelings that we had leaving all the time and going through that, the Israelis are feeling.
That movie Stop Loss.
Stop Loss, yes. So they're out digging foxholes, and it takes a mental toll on not just the people that are battling, but the families as well. Now, there's also concern within the IDF that 30 to 50% of reservists might not even show up when they're asked to.
Oh, gosh.
And I've even seen some calls on social media for soldiers not to report for their duty when they get called.
Like a protest?
Yep.
Okay, well, what about the hostage families?
Yeah, they vehemently oppose this operation. They want their loved ones back. That's all they care about. And that's not all they care about, but that's at the forefront of their minds right now. Now, recent polls show 67% of Israelis oppose a major operation to occupy Gaza and actually support a deal to end the war and free the hostages. Now, majority in those same polls think Netanyahu is continuing the war only for political reasons.
Well, it sounds like an incredibly high-stakes gamble then. I mean, using the threat of this devastating operation to pressure Hamas while facing significant domestic and international opposition sounds like untenable.
Yeah,
sure.
that's a good one.
And with President Trump in the region, it adds yet another layer of complexity.
Yeah, the definition of a high-stakes gamble, I would say. Now, the IDF's deployment prior to this potential launch is framed as providing that, quote, window of opportunity, end quote, for a deal. So putting more pressure on Hamas to get the deal done so Gideon's chariot doesn't have to be carried out. And a lot of people are calling this the Witkoff framework, quote, Witkoff framework, end quote. I don't know if you know Witkoff. He's the envoy. He's been talking to Russia to try to... Steve. Old Steve.
Old Steve.
Yep, Uncle Steve.
Don't you?
Now, Israel has made it clear that even if a deal is reached, they intend to retain any territory cleared and add that to its security zone. Not good when you're trying to get a deal in place. And they've said if no deal happens, there's a stark warning. Operation Gideon's Chariots will begin with great intensity, and it's not going to stop until all its objectives are achieved. That includes those plans for voluntary immigration.
And as all of this is happening, tensions are obviously high elsewhere as well. I saw a brief mention of Israeli strikes on Houthi rebels in Yemen after a missile hit an Israeli airport.
Yeah, they hit the international airport in Sana'a, an airport I've been in. Probably hasn't been improved since I've been in it, and I don't know that the missile made it any worse than it already was, but that's personal, opinionated things that I will say. Look, the Middle East is a tinderbox. It's been for a while, but the immediate focus, the immediate deadline that I'm looking at, that I'm watching, is that Gaza ultimatum. That's why I wanted to get this out and talk about this today. This week that this comes out, leading up to and during President Trump's visit, this is going to be absolutely critical.
When you say visit, you don't mean like, is he still going to Israel?
No, I think he's been in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates. He's going to go into Syria.
Skipping
He's bypassing.
Okay, well,
Israel.
I thought earlier you said he was going into Israel, so...
I was trying to say he's bypassing Israel and the optics of that looks very bad.
I'm saying earlier when we started talking about
Oh.
it, like you said it like it was happening because you were like, it's happening this week in a few days' time. And I'm like, it's the 13th right now.
Oh, yeah,
What are you talking
that's
about?
the Middle East trip. So the trip to Saudi Arabia, the trip to Qatar, the trip to the UAE, all of that.
Yeah, all right. So obviously critical and potentially tragic. So thank you, Kervin, for breaking all of that down. It was a lot. And it's obviously a lot to process. We will continue tracking this war, but for now, let's shift our focus to the situation between India and Pakistan. But before we dive in, we need to take a quick break for a message from our sponsors. So please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, listeners. As we said before the break, we are shifting to the situation between India and Pakistan. Before the weekend, it looked like the world was on the brink of witnessing yet another major regional war, but it was going to be between two nuclear powers.
Mhm.
Then, without much of any warning, President Trump announced on social media, his favorite thing in the world, that India and Pakistan had reached a, quote, full and immediate ceasefire, end quote, after what he described as a, quote, long night of talks, end quote, mediated by the U.S. Secretary of State Rubio. Rubio later confirmed this, mentioning engagement with both Prime Ministers Modi and Sharif, and even suggesting future broader talks at a neutral site. That sounds like a huge step back from the brink. I mean,
Mhm.
was there any indication that this kind of diplomatic push was underway?
I honestly, no, not publicly.
I kind of love that they
yeah.
kind of kept it under wraps.
They did, but now it's all the talk, and there's
We did it, guys.
we did it.
We did it, Joe.
Yeah. So we all knew. Well, when I say we, I'm talking about the perpetually online who are always looking at this stuff. There were the indications that the international community was concerned, but the direct involvement of the U.S. at this level, leading to an immediate ceasefire, that is pretty noteworthy. Marco Rubio even commended both prime ministers. He commended them for their, quote, wisdom, prudence, and statesmanship, end quote. Now, Pakistan's foreign minister also confirmed the ceasefire on local news, and he credited the U.S., along with Saudi Arabia and Turkey, for the facilitation efforts.
That's a W for the American
Yeah.
government. Wow. Hey,
And take the wins.
take the wins. Take the wins.
Eating
like
W's.
I said earlier, whenever you were talking about the fact that Trump was actually putting pressure on Russia, I was like, wow, let's do it.
Now, you remember
And the fact that he's starting to push back against Netanyahu. It's like,
yes.
yes.
And the concern was before, during the Biden administration, before all of this, is what happens if China mediates all of this stuff?
Right.
And China is now seen as the peacemaker, and then they are invited to the table for all of these things.
But
I just saw a poll out just today, that among the international community, 54% of the international community believes that the U.S. will do good for the world. That's down from over 68%.
Right.
And that China, 58% of the international community considers that China would do something good.
100%.
Right. No, but it's
overlapping.
It can overlap, right? Do you think the same people who think that the U.S. could do some good could also think that China would do some good?
Okay,
but that's up from 38% last year.
Oh, wow.
And so that was always a concern. What would China do with this increased notoriety, becoming the new superpower, the new global power?
But also, Trump's not doing everything that everybody expected him to
Exactly.
do. It's a surprise.
It is.
It's not a bad surprise. So after days of escalating military action, including missile and drone strikes, it seems like cooler heads have finally prevailed.
Something we always ask for on this podcast.
Yeah. So the relief in Pakistan, according to reports, is palpable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the relief around the world is palpable. Look, I saw reports of celebrations in Pakistan, people expressing relief after such a tense night of retaliatory strikes. Now, there was one quote that stood out. This was from a civil engineer in Islamabad, and he thanked the United States for their efforts, and he expressed a desire for friendship between Pakistan and the United States. And even Afghan refugees who are now in Pakistan, they've already fled one conflict zone. They're now in another one. They have voiced their own relief because of this de-escalation and this quick de-escalation.
Yet Pakistan did launch retaliatory strikes before the ceasefire, didn't they? Like the report mentions them hitting Indian military installations.
Yeah, so just before the ceasefire was announced, Pakistan confirmed launching retaliatory strikes, claiming to have destroyed several Indian military installations. That includes a runway at a key airbase there in India. Now, their military spokesman described it as a, quote, brief but brilliant, end quote, response that sent a strong message to India. Now, this action likely played a role in bringing both sides to the negotiating table, though. It demonstrated that Pakistan was willing and able to respond to India's earlier strikes.
India, for its part, had also accused Pakistan of initiating the escalation with their own strikes, targeting air bases and other infrastructure. It was a very dangerous back and forth.
Yeah, and that's what everybody was concerned about. Both sides were claiming to be retaliating for the other's actions. That's a classic definition of an escalating conflict spiral. Now, India claimed its strikes targeted Pakistan's technical infrastructure, their command centers, radar sites, also weapon storage areas using their air-launched precision weapons. And then Pakistan, in turn, accused India of targeting air bases. Now, the heavy exchange of fire along the line of control leading into the weekend was, I think, what got everyone very worried.
So, with this ceasefire in place, does this mean the immediate crisis is over? Like, can we breathe a sigh of relief, or should we kind of hold out for that?
Bated breath.
Bated breath.
I think the ceasefire is a positive and crucial step. I do think the situation still remains fragile. Like I said, just hours after the agreement was announced, we had explosions and blackouts in Indian-controlled Kashmir. The one prominent Kashmiri politician even questioned the validity of the ceasefire on social media because he could hear air defense activity in the area that he was at.
What do you mean, the one prominent?
I'm going to say a prominent, not one
It
prominent.
sounds like you said the one prominent politician.
It's Omar Abdullah. He's a prominent Kashmiri politician.
Okay, sorry. So, obviously, it's incredibly concerning. So, even as the diplomats are shaking hands and kind of patting each other on the back for de-escalating this, there are already potential violations on the ground.
Yeah, and look, this tends to happen every single time. We're a few days removed from it. The ceasefire is remaining, but this happens even in the age of instant communication. This happens, and it's especially true when you have something like this that was so hush hush. They kept it quiet all weekend that the discussions were going on or that they were ongoing, and it appears not everyone got the word in a timely fashion. I think both sides started accusing each other of violating the ceasefire. It's not so much a violation, it's just, I didn't get the word, right? So the Indian Foreign Secretary, Misri, he stated that Pakistan had performed repeated violations. This is because of a border intrusion that happened. Now, Pakistan's foreign ministry blamed Indian forces for initiating the violation, but both sides reaffirmed their commitment to the agreement, and they urged communication at appropriate levels to resolve any of these issues.
Yes, urge communication at appropriate levels. Well, I mean, it sounds like the distrust and animosity are so deeply ingrained that even a U.S. brokered ceasefire is going to be tested. You know?
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate reality
of humans being humans.
Of humans, of decades-long conflict, of
Don't
millennia-long.
like somebody.
I know. Tribes, right?
Tribes.
We're all put into our little tribes, and you can't like the other tribe because they're your enemy.
Because they're not in your tribe.
Yeah.
You're just supposed to like your tribe.
Now, while this ceasefire might halt the immediate military confrontation and then prevent further loss of life, it doesn't address the root causes of the tension. Hopefully, though, this ceasefire provides an opportunity for sustained dialogue and a move towards a more lasting peace. But it's going to take a lot of effort and goodwill from both sides.
And the U.S. role in all this? Trump's announcement on social media is certainly very Trumpian, something that could be viewed as unconventional diplomacy, but I'm sure it's going to become more prevalent as the years go on. Like, everybody's on social media, so,
Yeah.
it's going to happen. He also mentioned increasing trade with both nations and said during the talks that trade wasn't even discussed.
Right.
But it could happen, we could all get together and we could trade.
Very Trump.
Yeah, very Trump. So that's an interesting addendum.
It's unconventional, certainly. Now, what I think this really shows is U.S. interest in de-escalating conflicts. What I mean there is that's what Trump ran on. I'm going to be the president of less wars and not more wars. And he's kind of showing that right now. He wants peace everywhere, no matter who it affects, right?
How dare he want peace?
Well, when I say no matter who it affects, it's give land to Russia and as long as you stop the war.
Yeah,
Give land to Israel as long as you stop the war.
Somebody has to make concessions. Just end it.
Yeah, I don't care who it is. You just have to do it.
Yeah.
Now, the trade comment, like you said, very, very Trump. It could be a genuine attempt to incentivize peace through economic ties, or it could be once again a more transactional view of this whole situation. In the war, and what do you got for me? Do you got another Air Force One you can give me? What else can I get? And as we all know, only time is going to tell what comes of all of that.
So the key takeaway is that while a ceasefire is a welcome development and a testament to the potential for de-escalation through diplomacy, especially with this administration, the situation is still incredibly delicate because we're not out of the woods yet.
No, we're not. You're exactly right. The ceasefire buys time, but it's really crucial that both India and Pakistan seize that opportunity to engage in meaningful dialogue. They have to address the fundamental issues that continue to fuel this dangerous border rivalry. The international community, particularly the United States, parties like Saudi Arabia and Turkey, they need to continue to play a constructive role in facilitating that process. For the sake of regional stability and global security, this fragile ceasefire, this fragile peace, I think needs to hold.
Definitely keeping our fingers crossed here. It really brings home just how quickly things can shift and the absolutely vital role diplomacy plays when these critical situations unfold. Now, turning our attention to our final topic today, Europe is looking particularly
Beautiful.
Dynamic.
Oh.
Wouldn't you agree? I mean, we've seen some surprising election results and political maneuvering that has certainly gotten us to talk this week. All right, so let's head to Eastern Europe to start, specifically Romania. So what is the buzz coming out of there? It sounds like the political ground is shifting.
It really is. So on May 4th, we saw George Simeon. He's the leader of the far-right AUR party. He won the first round of their presidential election with a significant 40.96%, almost 41% of the vote. He's heading to a runoff on May 18th against the reformist candidate. That candidate got 21% of the vote.
Hold on. Didn't we actually touch on those Romanian elections like a while back? Like, I seem to recall a candidate who was subsequently detained.
Exactly, yeah. So for those who don't remember, you're just starting to listen to us now, this May election happened because the results of a November 2024 first round that was initially won by another far-right candidate, Calin Georgescu. They were annulled, and the reason for that annulment was what they called likely Russian interference.
Likely Russian interference. We hear that term a lot. So for our listeners, and honestly, even for me, that can feel a bit vague, kind of like a catch-all excuse for them to justify what they're doing, their political maneuvering.
I'm glad you said that because to some people, especially just on the right, they see that all the time.
Yeah.
Russian interference, and they consider it a term to use in order to arrest a candidate or to
you don't
get
even
your
have
way.
to have proof. You can just throw it out there and, okay, so I mean, you've seen this stuff up close in different theaters. So, what does that actually look like in a situation like Romania's?
Look, in this case, it was actually pretty blatant. Now, Romanian intelligence actually declassified the documents outlining it so they could show the proof.
I kind of like that.
Yep. And
Transparency
be transparent as long as it
doesn't affect security.
doesn't affect national security. And you know how I feel about always calling for it's national security. It's national security. No, saying that
That's the same thing as saying Russian interference for everything. Using national security as an excuse to hide things. That's the same.
to not show a satellite image that has been, cleaned, what we would call cleaned, meaning you don't see where the satellite's location was, what it's looking at. You're only seeing the image,
Right.
and you can see that what you said is what happened. This is just one part
One
of
example,
it, right? One
yeah.
example. I think you can do that. It takes time and effort and some money, obviously, but you can do it, and it's for good reasons. And I think that's why Romania did this, because there was a lot of people who were saying, you're just saying Russian interference because you're trying to get your way.
Well, governments aren't able to get away with just doing whatever they want now.
Not in this age.
There's so much information available at everybody's fingertips. Like,
Yep.
you have to answer for your actions.
Absolutely. And in this case,
or you should have to. I'm not
Well-
saying you have to, because people don't. But I'm glad.
always happen.
Yeah.
But we should hold our elected leaders accountable. If you voted for a person,
Mhm.
you especially should hold that person accountable to what you wanted, not just praising everything that they do just because you voted for them.
Yeah.
And that goes on all sides. So if you're thinking of a particular candidate, you're right.
Yeah.
I tell you, you're right.
We're talking
You should
everybody.
hold them accountable. In this particular case, we're talking about a large-scale TikTok campaign. Now, TikTok itself admitted in March that it removed over 27,000 fake accounts promoting the AUR party. Then there were cyber attacks. That was by a pro-Russian hacker group. They even bragged about it on Telegram. They did a DDoS account, or a direct denial of service.
A what?
It's a denial of service.
Okay, sorry. It just sounded like one big word.
Oh, yeah.
It just all the words blended together, so I needed you to repeat that with that second D.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a DDoS account attack on actual Romanian government sites. They were actually attacking other candidates during the May 4th vote this go round. And they were explicitly saying, these the Russian hackers, that they were doing it because Simeon is seen as an ally of Putin. Now, this is classic hybrid warfare. You destabilize, influence, and create chaos. It's a playbook that we have definitely seen Russia, China, North Korea deploy and refine for many years.
I mean, it's all becoming clearer why they had to hold another election right now, since the other guy was not.
Yeah, I mean, so in the November election, it was all based around TikTok. There were some inconsistencies with what he was doing on TikTok. And as campaign finance, you're not supposed to take in or spend certain amount of money on certain things. And they were doing everything in their power to do sketchy things.
Okay. Well, so despite all of that, Simeon won the first round.
Mhm.
So what are his actual policies? Because from what I've read, it's a bit of a mixed bag, especially concerning Russia and Ukraine.
That's putting it mildly, Tiana. On one hand, look, he's called for a halt to Romanian aid to Ukraine, and has made territorial claims on parts of Ukraine and Moldova.
So he wants to annex parts of it?
He does not want to annex the parts. He's fine with Russia annex.
Oh, so he's... Okay. I thought he was going to say that,
Romania
is going to take these...
And maybe at some point he might do that.
We don't know what we're talking about. We don't know what we're talking about.
Now, that aligns, obviously, with the Kremlin narratives. But he's actually banned from entering both Ukraine and Moldova because of his anti-Ukrainian activities. So he can't even get in there to do anything. Now, here's the twist with all that. He also expresses support for Romania's continued participation in a U.S.-led NATO as a deterrent against Russia. That's where I say it could be future territorial grabs
Right.
if he can get Russia out of the picture here.
He's not going to be able to do that.
No, right.
Big dreams. He's got big dreams.
What does President Trump say? Don't start a war with a country 10 times bigger than your military. That's what he said to Zelensky. He falsely claimed
that
Ukraine had started the war.
Right. He forgot.
Yeah, look, this guy even supports sanctions against Russia and has called Putin's Russia a major threat on the international scale.
So he's just playing both sides of that fence. Pro-NATO, anti-Russia in one breath, but echoing Kremlin lines about wanting to cut off Ukraine in the next. And didn't he say something about the other far-right guy, Georgescu?
Yeah, he did. He still supports Kalin Georgescu. Now, that guy is overtly pro-Russian. He's also anti-NATO. It's even said that, this is Simeon talking, he'd consider Georgescu for prime minister if he wins. It's a complex and, frankly, concerning picture going on in Romania right now.
So how does this play out with the government in Bucharest? Is it stable enough to navigate this, especially with that May 18th runoff looming?
Yeah, look, the current ruling coalition in Romania appears to be fracturing. They're not the only European country that looks like they are fracturing. The Prime Minister of Romania actually announced his resignation. That happened on May 5th. That was right after their candidate failed to even make the runoff. So there's significant domestic political turmoil happening. It's making it unclear who could form a government or how a figure like a Georgescu could ever get parliamentary approval. And look, this directly impacts Romania's crucial support for Ukraine. They've provided Patriot system, and they've also hosted F-16 pilots for training. That all could be at risk.
Well, that is definitely another situation that we will be watching closely. We have been reporting on their elections since last year.
Yeah.
Let's shift west just a little bit. Because speaking of wobbly starts and the need for stability in Europe, Germany gave us quite the political drama this week too, didn't it?
Yeah, it really did. So everyone had just expected that Friedrich Merz, the conservative leader, we all thought he would just sail into the chancellorship after his party won the federal election back in February. They signed a coalition deal with the center-left SPD. We thought everything was in the books.
But it wasn't quite that smooth, was it? Because humans are involved.
Yeah. You could tell from my inflection, right? Not that easy.
Yeah, so walk us through what happened with that vote.
Right. So in the first parliamentary vote on Tuesday, Merz needed 316 votes in the 630-seat Bundestag. Now, he only got 310, and this was a massive blow. It's unprecedented in modern German history for a candidate to fail like that on the first attempt when your coalition already has the numbers. He already had the 316 votes within his coalition. He only got 310 votes. That meant at least 18 from his own coalition decided not to back him.
Well, that is a rough start. So how does a leader and a coalition recover from that public dissent on day one, especially when Europe is looking to Germany for strong leadership on so many fronts?
Yeah, us too. We need a strong Germany.
We need a strong Germany, y'all.
Yeah.
We need it to be strong.
Look,
We'll explain that later, okay?
That vote was not strategic. It was a significant challenge. It was a humiliation. It would be as if when Donald Trump was elected, he had 18 Republicans vote against the election and put Kamala Harris in office. That's how humiliating it is in that first round.
Whenever he thought he had it in the bag, kind
Right.
of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, because
I mean, he did. He had it in the bag. But.
right. So we have an electoral college, electoral votes. So those voters from each state actually put in their votes for president, right? It's not us, the people we are voting, and then our people represent us to go vote. So there is a chance that if someone is popular among the people but not within the government in the United States, they would not get elected because those people would change their votes.
Right.
It'd be politically devastating. It'd be political suicide.
Right.
But it could happen. It's what Donald Trump tried to do in 2020 or in 2021, whenever he asked for them not to confirm the votes for Biden. And no one did it because it's political suicide. That's what happened here. Now, he did manage to win in the second vote that happened on that same day. He got 325 votes after that. So 15 more people voted.
And they changed their mind?
And they changed their mind.
Do you think there was some, like...
grandstanding, maybe?
Not necessarily grandstanding, but, like, promises. Like, if you vote for me, I'll give you...
Oh, after the fact? Yeah, absolutely. I think the first round of voting, you had some people who were not really in favor of Frederick Merz and some of the things he wanted to do. And then after the fact, his coalition went around and most likely gave promises to them, to their constituents, and yeah. Now, even though he got all the votes, the damage there on the credibility, really, of the government was done. And some analysts are pointing to a heightened mistrust between these coalition partners that they coalesced around. Now, some are saying that the hope for Germany to reassert itself as an anchor of stability has been dashed because of this initial failure. Now, Merz himself has brushed it off. He's saying he just wants to get to work. He doesn't care about the vote. He wants mutual trust from all the people of Germany.
So who were these dissenters, and why throw such a wrench in the works right at the beginning?
There was some speculation that it was disgruntled SPD members, but more recent analysis suggests some of the dissent came from his own conservative bloc. They were apparently unhappy with his U-turn on fiscal policy, and specifically loosening borrowing limits. This is after campaigning on fiscal rectitude, one of the pillars of their conservatism. Now, as is often the case when mainstream parties stumble, pollsters start to say that someone from one of the far right or far left, and in this case, they're saying that the far right, the AfD, is likely the only real winners in this whole debacle as it erodes trust in established institutions.
So now that Chancellor Merz is officially in office, what are the big items on his agenda? Germany's a powerhouse, so its stability and direction matter immensely.
Yeah, look, he's facing a packed agenda right now. He's got to agree on security guarantees for Ukraine. That's a big one. Navigating trade issues with the U.S., with those tariffs, the Trump tariffs, plus the ongoing economic adjustments after losing cheap Russian gas because of the sanctions. He's also got to manage the growing rivalry with China. Now, domestically, his coalition wants to revive growth. They want to support Ukraine. They also want to increase their own military spending. So, Merz already scheduled his first trip to France. He's also scheduled a trip to Poland. And he's got a call in the works with U.S. President Trump. His cabinet choices right now, what I have viewed, they reflect a desire for renewal. He's trying to bring in new faces. He's trying to get people with private sector experience. This is something President Trump has been doing, right? Private sector experience, Elon Musk, defense contractors, those kind of things.
Reality shows.
Yeah, reality shows. I was half listening, I guess, and you said reality shows, and I was waiting for, like, reality shows us that blah blah blah. And
I meant reality shows.
You meant reality shows, yeah. Now he did keep Boris Pistorius as the defense minister. That is a smart move because they are going to need some continuity there.
an attempt to signal a fresh start with the cabinet then, but that shaky first vote will kind of cast a shadow.
Yeah,
It really feels like a lot of European capitals are watching Berlin very closely.
no doubt. We are too.
So, Kervin, pulling these two situations together, Romania and Germany, what's the big picture here from your perspective, looking at it with your analyst hat on, and also through the lens of your service? Like, what should our listeners be taking away from all of this? We are seeing these significant political shifts and instability in two key European countries. But looking beyond what we've specifically discussed today, what are the broader trends or flashpoints we should all be watching? And why does an election in Romania or a chancellor vote in Germany actually matter to someone listening in, say, Ohio or California? I mean, it can feel very distant to some. Like, it feels like it doesn't necessarily affect them.
Yeah, and it's you asking a very critical question. That's because nothing happens in a vacuum anymore. These aren't just isolated European stories. They're data points in a much larger global pattern. So what we should be watching for is how these individual national narratives, the rise of specific parties, the success or failure of certain leaders, feed into broader geopolitical shifts. Look, think about it. An election result anywhere can alter international alliances, can reshape trade agreements, trump tariffs. That impacts global security postures, and it even influences energy markets. So whether it's in Europe, it's in South America, Asia, Africa, Ohio, these votes all have a ripple effect that absolutely reaches the United States or wherever you're listening from. It affects your economy, foreign policy, even the security partnerships that each country relies on. But all that brings me to another crucial point I want to talk about. We need to be laser focused on the increasing effectiveness of Russia's gray zone warfare. We talked about the overt stuff in Romania, the TikTok campaigns, the DDoS attacks. The real insidious success of these tactics is how pervasively these narratives can spread. They're often laundered through multiple sources until they're picked up and amplified, sometimes unwittingly, by voices within our own countries. Right now, we're seeing high-level podcasters, high-level commentators, influencers in the US, Canada, the UK. They're regurgitating talking points that originated as carefully crafted Kremlin disinformation. The goal isn't always to make you believe a specific lie. The goal sometimes is to just muddy the waters so much that people lose faith in any information, makes them more susceptible to simplistic, often divisive narrative. And it's about eroding trust in democratic institutions. That's full stop there.
That is a chilling thought, that the conversation itself can be weaponized so effectively. So if these groups, often fueled by the external interference or riding waves of discontent, are gaining traction, how should democratic governments respond? Because the instinct for some might be to just shut them all down.
Yeah, and that's often exactly the wrong instinct, I think. So from my experience, not experiments, I haven't experimented with this. Governments do themselves no favors trying to arrest leaders or dismantle political groups purely through force or legal suppression, especially if those groups are operating within the bounds of the law. Now, we might consider it distasteful and that their rhetoric is not what we like, but the approach that these governments are taking often backfire. It plays into the narrative of persecution. It can create martyrs, and it drives these movements underground where they become even harder to understand and counter. Instead, what I think is desperately needed is for democratic governments and institutions to get much, much better at fighting on the information battlefield. They need to ramp up their own strategic messaging, not just reactively, but proactively. Find an authentic, compelling voice, or honestly, many voices, to champion the values of freedom, transparency, and genuine democratic participation. It's about clearly and consistently articulating what you stand for, not just what you're against. It's not about suppressing misinformation. It's about inoculating the public against disinformation by investing in critical thinking. We need to raise the mantle of freedom with conviction, demonstrate its benefits, rather than just try to stamp out the voices of those who seek to undermine it. I say that because honestly, when you see folks resorting to name calling, dismissing someone because they're a basement dweller, or whatever insult comes to mind, instead of actually dissecting their arguments with facts and logic, it doesn't do any good. It just derails any chance of productive dialogue and, frankly, makes it harder for anyone to understand what's really at stake here.
A battle of ideas. I think that is a powerful and much more nuanced approach than what we often see discussed on social media, which is, like you said, all the name calling.
Yeah.
Definitely a lot to keep an eye on and a lot to consider about how we all engage with this information and disinformation.
Yep.
A lot of moving pieces and a lot of uncertainty. So thank you. Anything else you want to discuss?
No, I'm good. Do you have anything you want to talk about?
I just want to apologize for us being absent pretty much for the last 2 weeks.
Yes.
We have a lot going on over here behind the scenes and a very small window of time in which we can accomplish it, like a very small window of time. And so we kind of had to reprioritize just for now while we get
just
settled.
these last few weeks.
Yeah, just these last few weeks. And we are going to start releasing the podcast on Mondays. Also, our sound might be a little off for a little while we figure out our new setup and
situation.
Yeah, our situation. Yeah. So please be patient with us while we figure that out again, because I know you guys are getting used to the crispy voices.
Yes. You like this, and you like us talking over each other, I'm sure.
Yeah.
At some points.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And we are continuing the podcast. That's what I want everyone to know. Some people know what's going on behind the scenes who are listening right now. And I've assured everyone, to include Mike Leon from Leon Media Network, we are continuing the podcast.
Right. We like to jibber jabber too much.
Yes, and we like talking to each other. We like talking to each other about, I don't know if we like talking about these events. But I think talking about them brings everything into perspective. And so one of us can spiral. And it's not just one, it's not, only Curvin spirals or only Tiana. No, we can both spiral at certain moments, and the other one comes in and kind of brings some clarity to the situation.
And brings us back to the topic at hand.
Yes. And you hear it on this podcast, and that's what we love. And I love hearing how much you guys love it whenever we go on a tangent, and then one of us brings it back and tries to get us back on topic. So that's not going away either.
Yeah, we will definitely be clearer about what's going on over here once everything gets settled. It's just a lot. It's been a whole lot all at once. Very, like I said, very small window of time to accomplish what we need to get done, and we couldn't record the last couple of weeks. But
and we have Mother's Day. So happy Mother's Day to all the mothers listening. I know it's a little late.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there.
We did celebrate Tiana. So.
Yeah, and it was very sweet. It was a really sweet day. I liked it a lot. I had a choice whether or not we were going to go out or not. And I was like, I'm not going in.
Yeah. Exactly.
Our schedule is packed.
Yeah.
It's been packed for...
Those were your exact words. Our schedule is packed enough. Why would I go somewhere else?
I don't want to go anywhere. I just want to sit down and do nothing. And he made me ribs.
Yep. It was a great chill day.
Yeah. But more importantly, he made me ribs.
Tiana's favorite I can do. I'm not a cook.
But he is good at making ribs. He has perfected those, and yes, chef's kiss. As someone who is very proficient in the kitchen,
yes.
I love your ribs. So,
thank you.
Anyways, yeah. And I think that's all we have.
That's all the time we have.
That's all the time we have. Thank you for being patient with us while we figured all this new trajectory out.
Yes.
Thank you so much for listening to This Week Explained. We hope that you found it both informative and engaging. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. For more in-depth coverage of these stories and more, be sure to follow us on social media at This Week Explained.
Tiana, honestly, thank you so much. And until next week, stay safe out there.